Did you know that during World War II, Indian waters became one of the empire's most dangerous front lines? Not with towering battleships or famous naval duels, but with relentless escorts, converted vessels, and warships that quietly stood between survival and collapse. Indian naval forces guarded supply arteries stretching from the Middle East to Southeast Asia, where submarines, mines, and sudden air attacks hunted anything that moved. These ships weren't symbols. They were shields. And today, we're walking through India's deadliest World War II warships. So, without wasting time, let's start our topic with the first one, that is HMIS Baluchistan. You don't usually hear her name when people talk about World War II, and that alone already tells you what kind of ship Baluchistan, J182, was. She entered service on 28th of October, 1942, after being laid down in July 1941, not even meant for India at first. She was built for the Royal Navy, then quietly transferred to the Royal Indian Navy once the war began chewing through escort ships faster than Britain could replace them. Structurally, she was a Bangor-class minesweeper, the kind of vessel designed for cramped decks, shallow waters, and dangerous proximity to invisible death. Mines didn't care about heroics. Submarines didn't announce themselves. The aircraft didn't wait for permission. In late 1942, Baluchistan spent time training and operating alongside British submarines off Tobermory, preparing for convoy defense before shifting toward work that fed directly into the Indian Ocean supply lanes. She never chased fame. She cleared paths. She stood between cargo ships and instant destruction. HMIS Kathiawar. If you want a picture of what survival logistics looked like, Kathiawar, J155, fits it better than any photograph. She was ordered in late 1939, built in Blyth, England, and then handed over to the Royal Indian Navy before launch, finally entering service on the 23rd of December, 1942. On paper, she was another Bangor-class minesweeper. In reality, she became a roaming insurance policy. Her job wasn't just pulling mines from the sea. It was making sure convoys stayed stitched together across vast, exhausted waters where enemy submarines and aircraft waited for mistakes. From 1943 to 1945, Kathiawar worked inside the Eastern Fleet's escort screen, helping cover routes stretching between Africa, British India, and Australia, the long arterial lines that kept the empire fed, fueled, and moving. There were no victory parades for that kind of service, just endless watches, endless returns, endless tension. After the war fractured the subcontinent, she crossed another invisible line, transferred to Pakistan, where she sailed again as PNS Chittagong. HMIS Rohilkhand. Rohilkhand, J180, didn't even start life under an Indian name, though she was originally ordered as a Royal Navy vessel called HMS Padstow, then reassigned before launch, finally becoming part of the Royal Indian Navy and commissioning on the 5th of February, 1943. By design, she was a Bangor-class minesweeper, but by necessity, she became something broader, clearing minefields one week, riding convoy screens the next, carrying depth charges whenever submarines were suspected nearby. Between 1943 and 1945, Rohilkhand operated inside Eastern Fleet convoy routes linking Africa, British India, and Australia, an exhausting circuit of patrols, escorts, and sudden alarms. Her boiler-driven engines and crew of roughly 60 men represented the smallest units of the war's ocean labor: tight spaces, constant vibration, salt everywhere, danger nowhere and everywhere at once. She didn't collapse under fire. She wore down under repetition. After years of movement, she finally slowed. I decommissioned in the early 1960s, then scrapped in 1961, her war ending not with an explosion, but with the long quiet of dismantling. HMIS Bengal. Let me put you into her story, because Bengal doesn't need a build-up. On November 11, 1942, she was escorting the Dutch tanker Ondina through the Indian Ocean. No fleet, no backup armada, just fuel and a single shield. Then 2 Japanese commerce raiders appeared, Hokoku Maru and Ikoku Maru, ships built to hunt, not scare. What followed wasn't a naval battle. It was a refusal. Bengal and Ondina fired until they physically couldn't anymore. Somehow, against scale and design logic, their resistance triggered a catastrophe aboard Hokoku Maru, which exploded and sank. Both defenders ran out of ammunition. That detail matters. They didn't disengage because they chose to. They stopped because there was nothing left to fire. That moment sits at the core of your intro. Bengal wasn't protecting glory. She was protecting fuel. And fuel meant planes could fly. Convoys could move. Wounded ships could reach the harbor. No towering battleships. Just a small escort refusing to let the artery collapse. HMIS Indus. Indus, U-67, was never designed to intimidate anyone. She was a Grimsby-class sloop, purpose-built for patrol and escort work, the kind of ship that lives its life on the edges of other people's missions. She spent her service years guarding movement, ships, supplies, sea lanes, until the war found her anyway. On April 6, 1942, off Akiab, Japanese aircraft caught her in the open. There's no dramatic maneuver recorded, no miraculous escape. Indus was sunk by an air attack, doing the exact job she had been built for. That's why she belongs in this list. Her story isn't about what she destroyed. It's about what she stood between. Aircraft overhead, submarines beneath, mines wherever they could be laid. Indus worked inside that layered threat until the day one layer finally broke through. In a war defined by famous duels, her ending reflects the quieter truth of the Indian Ocean theater, where danger arrived without warning, and escort ships absorbed it so entire supply networks didn't. HMIS Sutlej now imagine a ship built with urgency baked into her bones. Sutlej, U-95, was ordered on the 8th of September 1939, barely after the world cracked open, and by 23rd April 1941, she was already commissioned, sliding straight into a war that had no patience for training seasons. Her early life belonged to convoy defense, the kind of duty where every horizon feels suspicious and every echo could be metal moving underwater. Over time, her work thickened. She wasn't just guarding lines anymore. She was escorting toward Singapore, roaming the Bay of Bengal, circling the Indian west coast, pushing outward into the Persian Gulf and Aden, stitching together waters that enemy aircraft and submarines kept trying to tear apart. And when the war demanded more than protection, Sutlej followed it. She later appeared far from Indian waters, tied to Sicily in 1943, before turning back east into the closing violence of Burma operations, where she became part of the naval weight behind Operation Dracula, the assault that pried Rangoon open. Her career doesn't move in a straight line. It sprawls. And that sprawl is exactly what shield work looks like. HMIS. Jumna didn't get eased into anything. In that environment, Jumna, U-21, wasn't just an escort. She became an anti-aircraft wall, Between 24 and 28 February 1942, her gunners were credited with shooting down 5 Japanese aircraft. That detail doesn't belong to a glory narrative. It belongs to a survival one. Planes weren't targets. They were threats to everything moving behind her. The recognition that followed wasn't about victory. Commissioned in 1941, she was dropped straight into the bloodstream of the war, where ships didn't sail so much as survive. By early 1942, the seas around the Java Sea and Sunda Strait had turned chaotic. Air attacks, collapsing Allied lines, convoys under constant watch. Awards were handed out for keeping guns operational, for staying at stations, and for continuing to engage under repeated strikes. That's the texture of Jumna's story. Not a decisive battle, a sustained refusal to let convoys be erased from the water. HMIS Orissa. Some ships exist because people want power. Orissa, J-200, existed because mines don't care about courage. She was a Bangor-class minesweeper, ordered on 24 August 1940 and commissioned on 14 March 1942, built for slow danger rather than fast combat. With a top speed of about 16 knots and a crew of roughly 60 men, she wasn't meant to chase anything. She was meant to go first. Every route she touched carried a question. Is the sea actually empty, or just pretending? That's why Orissa matters to your intro more than almost any gunship. Minesweepers kept the supply arteries open when submarines, drifting explosives, and raw fear were doing everything they could to close them. She moved through spaces others avoided, removing threats nobody could see until it was too late. Orissa didn't defend convoys from what was coming. She defended them from what was already there. HMIS. Cavalry arrived mid-conversation when the war had already taught everyone what kind of ocean this was. She was launched on the 15th of June, 1943, and commissioned on the 21st of October, 1943, entering a theater shaped by air attack more than surface duels. That reality is written into her body. Her profile included Type 272 surface radar and Type 285 fire control radar, paired with a heavy anti-aircraft focus. Not decoration, but necessity. The Indian Ocean had become a place where danger often fell from above. As a sloop, cavalry's identity wasn't in spectacle. It was in motion. Escort. Protect. Keep moving. That loop defined her service. Cavalry, U-10, fit the role your intro points to so directly because she wasn't meant to dominate water. She was meant to make water usable again, even when aircraft shadows kept sliding across it without warning. HMIS Narbada, U-40. S career reads like a line pulled across the globe. Her early work unfolded far from India, escorting convoys across the Mediterranean, before she shifted east into the Bay of Bengal and Eastern Fleet lanes, carrying the uncelebrated cargo of war supplies and troops through waters patrolled by Japanese submarines and aircraft. Commissioned on 29 April 1943, she was built as a modified Black Swan-class sloop, engineered specifically for convoy escort and anti-submarine warfare. By early 1945, Narbada was no longer just guarding movement. She was helping create it. Around Akiab, Ramri Island, and Rangoon, she supported amphibious landings, laying down protective gunfire and operating in zones where enemy response was expected, not hypothetical. Her anti-aircraft guns and anti-submarine gear didn't earn famous names, but they decided whether landing forces lived long enough to touch shore. After the war's lines were redrawn, Narbada crossed another boundary too. Transferred to Pakistan after partition, carrying her history into a new navy. HMIS Godavari. Let's start this one somewhere unexpected, not in Asia, but in the Atlantic. Before Godavari, U-52, ever touched the Pacific theater, she spent time on the UK Gibraltar convoy defense, moving through waters haunted by German submarines, proving early that Indian warships weren't confined to one ocean or one narrative. She formally joined the Royal Indian Navy as a Black Swan-class escort, commissioned on 28 June 1943, on carrying dual-purpose guns and depth charges built for the ugly work. Air threats above, steel ghosts below. Her pace never really slowed after that. Late 1943 brought collision damage and repairs, the kind that interrupt service only long enough to remind crews how replaceable ships really were. By 12 August 1944, Godavari was back in lethal form. Alongside British frigates, she helped hunt down and sink the German submarine U-198 off the Seychelles, at a rare Indian Ocean anti-submarine kill that never gets enough daylight. HMIS Bombay's story starts in a shipyard, not a battlefield. She was laid down in Sydney, a detail that already bends the idea of where Indian warships belonged, and by 24 April 1942, she was commissioned, stepping into a war that moved faster than any blueprint. Then history played one of its cruel little tricks. Before she even settled into Indian duties, Bombay was present in Sydney Harbor during the Japanese midget submarine raids of mid-1942, close enough to the danger to feel it without firing the famous shots. Not long after, she shifted west, stopping through Colombo, then sliding into the endless escort circuits between India and the Persian Gulf. That became her world. Rough seas, submarine watches, mine fears, convoys that only mattered because losing them would quietly break everything. When the war tilted toward offense, Bombay followed that turn too. HMIS Madras. Madras never needed an origin myth. She had a workload. Once assigned to the Eastern Fleet, her days blurred into a specific kind of tension. Convoys often had to be split in the open ocean, peeled apart so protection could be reshaped around threats that didn't announce themselves. That maneuver sounds technical. In practice, it meant isolation, long gaps of water, and the knowledge that if something rose beneath you, a help might be too far away to matter. Madras worked inside that pattern. Commissioned on 12 May 1942, she entered service as a Bathurst-class corvette and minesweeper, a hybrid designed for the exact problems nobody liked talking about: submarines that couldn't be seen, and explosives that waited without moving, keeping subs at bay, holding convoys together, making sure movement continued. There was nothing cinematic about it. That's why it mattered. HMES. Punjab joined the fight early enough to see how quickly the sea learned new ways to kill. From the beginning, her work leaned into distance, troop convoys, supply convoys, routes that stretched so far they stopped feeling like routes and started feeling like obligations. Somewhere along those runs, mines became as feared as torpedoes. They didn't chase. They waited. That reality followed Punjab into the closing chapter of the war. She was commissioned on 20th March 1942 as another Bathurst-class escort and minesweeper, built light, fast, and dangerous at close quarters. In July 1945, she carried out minesweeping operations off Phuket, clearing waters in support of planned amphibious landings in Malaya. It was the kind of task where success leaves nothing to photograph, just hulls that don't break. Mines rarely earn paragraphs in history books, Yet they quietly tore apart naval logistics throughout the war. Punjab existed to prevent that tearing. HMIS Konkan didn't begin under an Indian order. She was originally intended for the Royal Navy, but when the war thickened, priorities shifted, and she was handed to the Royal Indian Navy, entering service on June 12, 1942, as a Bangor-class minesweeper. Her first waters weren't warm or forgiving. She started in UK zones, the North Atlantic and the Irish Sea, escorting convoys and threading past U-boat territory, to learning the habits of submarines before she ever saw the Indian Ocean. That experience followed her east. By 1945, Konkan was woven into Eastern operations, helping support the Ramree Island landings and escorting assault convoys during the Burma campaign, where naval movement and ground survival were inseparable. When the guns finally quieted, her job didn't end. Mines remained. Channels were still poisoned. So Konkan stayed busy clearing the Malacca Strait, is reopening sea lanes for occupied regions, and prisoner releases. Then ships didn't chase legends. They carried survival across dark water. Thanks for staying with me through India's forgotten naval front. If this journey gives you something, then support the channel by liking, subscribing, and sharing it forward. Your clicks keep these stories alive and help more people discover them around the world.